It just always, that's why I've trained myself now on Zoom to make sure that if we're supposed to be, to ask that question before anybody starts. So, so that would be great. Thanks, Robbie. So good morning from Hawaii. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining our session today. So we're going to talk about the Genuine Progress Indicator, and we have 4 panelists on board. So we have, we're spanning the whole width of the United States. So we have Jon Erickson in Vermont, and we have Rob Moore in Ohio. We have Eli Lazarus in California, and I'm in Hawaii. I'll also be playing the role of moderator, but my panelists feel free to jump in if and when you think I need the help. GPI, the Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI, has been around for a really long time in the world of ecological economics. And suffice to say that it's always consistently gotten time on the agenda for these USSEE conferences. So it's only natural that we would have a session for this 12th USSEE conference for exploring the current topics and prospects for the future. So, we were excited to be able to have this this time in this session. So we weren't quite sure about what the familiarity of GPI of our audience members. So we put together a few slides of intro for that one. So I'm going to go through those very quickly. And then from there, I'll have the panelists introduce themselves and talk about their experience with GPI. And then we thought we'd do a round robin with the panelists, so throwing some prompts out there, getting their thoughts on what the current topics are or other issues that are related to GPI. And then we all agreed that we should have some time, a big chunk of time for discussion to include our audience members. So we have set aside the time for that in the second part of the session. So, and again, having a small group, this can make it a little bit more flexible. So we'll play that by ear. Please use the chat functions as we are going along. If you want to go ahead and register some comments or questions in the chat function, and then we can use those to revisit once we get to the discussion part. That would be a great way of, holding our thoughts and holding your thoughts, and, making sure that we can go back and catch up on those once we get to the second half. So these 2 slides, I just always put these 2 slides out here because this reminds us of why we do the work that we do. So GDP, developed by Simon Kuznets, was never intended to be a measure of social welfare or well-being. GDP is measuring the size of the economy, so to speak, through the transactions of final goods and services throughout the economy for a year, but it was never really intended to measure social well-being. And Bobby Kennedy in 1968 famously said that it measures everything in short except that which makes life worthwhile. So really calling out the fact that there are weaknesses in GDP, and to use it as a measure of progress or social welfare or well-being is really kind of short-sighted. So, and we know that, this is 1968, he's calling it out. So it's well known and well acknowledged that GDP has weaknesses in terms of the fact that it doesn't account for unpaid labor, that it doesn't account for externalities of economic activity like pollution. It doesn't account for natural capital depletion, and it doesn't really necessarily take into consideration inequality of income. So again, well known that there's weaknesses of GDP, but just a reminder of why we're actually delving into this field, into this kind of mire with this field. So if we look a little bit at the history of GPI, you can see GPI is an indicator of economic welfare. It looks at the costs and benefits of economic activity. We can trace its efforts back to the early 1970s with the measure of economic welfare. And you can see how it's evolved throughout time from Daly and Cobb's work to GPI 1.0, and currently we're working on GPI 2.0. So you can see how it's evolved, but all the efforts are addressing the weaknesses of GDP and trying to find some, more holistic measure of well-being in terms of society. So I put this diagram up here. This is the spokes of the wheel are talking about indicators within the Genuine Progress Indicator itself. This diagram is from the study that was done in Utah but I find that it's always a very clear visualization of the framework for GPI. So I use this, and again, this is just one framework. It can be apparent in different ways depending on which year you're looking at it, which method that you're using, but it's pretty much, there's a common framework that's there, and that's illustrated by this nicely. And you can see that it's a composite of several indicators. They span across the social, the economic, and the environmental realms. And you can see that there's pluses and minuses along the spokes of the wheels, and that's basically the foundation of GPI is starting with personal consumption expenditures, and then either adding or subtracting the costs and benefits of economic activity as you go around that wheel and look at the different indicators. All of the values are monetized, so if they're in dollar values, so that they're commensurate and can be compared across the different realms. And then it can be compared to GDP because it's in whatever year dollars that you're working with. So I've put a couple of examples up here, and so that people, if you're not familiar with it, you can kind of get a sense for how we work through the information that we use to calculate GPI. And so volunteer work, that's an example that comes from the social realm. And this is, pretty straightforward, looking at the average number of hours that are volunteered within your state. So in your state, within the nation, whatever that it is, and using publicly available data for those. In this case, we're using it from the American Time Use Survey. And then monetizing that by putting that up next to multiplying it by an average hourly wage rate for your community or for your state, whatever that it is. And then we get a value of volunteerism. And so volunteerism is just one example. Another example of unpaid labor could be caregiving or housework. But the point is that we include that's not necessarily included in GDP, but we will include it in GPI to recognize that that's a very important part of our society. This slide is courtesy of Eli. Thanks, Eli. And it's a great example of how we kind of manage it. We work through a whole bunch of spreadsheets, how we incorporate the data into those spreadsheets. And exactly as we talked through, we're talking about annual volunteer hours. We're talking about US average wage, or depending on if it's on your state, whatever it is. Very simple kind of way of looking at how we monetize those. And you can see that it's across the years of this study. So again, very straightforward sample or example of how we would do this. And again, this is a positive, right? It's incorporated as a positive into GPI. And as Eli says, you can imagine what would it be like if everyone stopped volunteering tomorrow. What would our society be like, and what losses would we incur from that? So we add that as a positive. There's another example. This time it's from an economic realm. It takes different forms depending on which method that you're using. How you calculate it might be different, but it's talking about the income. It's adjusting for inequality of incomes. It's taking personal consumption expenditures. It's using either the Gini coefficient, or in some other versions, there's other factors that can be calculated using diminishing marginal utilities. And then we're adjusting that downwards. We're adjusting GPI downward for inequality. Again, not picked up in GDP. Another quick example of greenhouse gases. This is an environmental one. This is also a negative adjustment. It adjusts for the costs of greenhouse gas emissions, and we monetize it using the social cost of carbon and publicly available data on emissions for your state or for your nation. So this is representing the externalities of economic activity as a cost. And a last example here, we're talking about natural capital, in particular protected areas. Protected areas and those ecosystems provide ecosystem services to all of us. And so we use publicly available data from USGS in terms of they have a protected areas database, and it's by land cover. So hectares of land covers. We monetize that using various studies that have come up with dollars per hectare for that type of land cover. And you can also use the ecosystem services valuation database, for example. And then that gives us a better idea of the positives that we can add through GPI of services that aren't recognized by GDP, the services that flow from natural capital. So just some really quick examples of how you would go through the process. Here's just some screenshots of, it's actually from a Wikipedia page. This is a result from Eli a long time ago, put together a table of all the studies that are out there and has thrown it up on Wikipedia. So here we just have some screenshots that I pulled out there. So you can note that it's GPI in the United States and in some Asian countries, but it's ISEW in Europe and some other countries. So talking about the same kind of idea. And also note that there's studies that have been done at the national level, regional levels, but also subnational levels. So of the 4 panelists today, we mostly have experience at the subnational level, except John, I think you've worked nationally for the US. So I think at this point, that was pretty much all that I wanted to cover in terms of an introduction, so that we can kind of catch people up to speed, or other people that might have been working on this for years. I know, Robbie, you've been working on GPI for a really long time. So at this point, I'd like to ask the panelists to talk a little bit about, introduce themselves first of all, and then talk a little bit about what your experiences with GPI have included. And we'll just go in alphabetical order. And I think at this point, I'm just going to pop off the, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you and I can see the chat. So go ahead, John, can we start with you first, please?
Sure. Thank you for that overview, Regina, and thanks for putting this panel together. Yeah, I mean, I've had a long and windy road with GPI. I landed at UVM, University of Vermont in 2002, where I'm currently the Blittersdorf Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy. Have been actively working in ecological economics really since grad school, since the mid-90s. And we started doing GPI work here in Vermont through a class. And in fact, almost all of our GPI studies have been through coursework. So one of the categories in GPI is unpaid labor. So it's actually even worse than that, because the students pay to do GPI by paying tuition. So all of our courses have been project-based in ecological economics, and this is one example. So the early study, 2003, was the first time that we took the national studies and boiled it down to a state study in Vermont. That study was then replicated in Maryland and elsewhere. And around 2011, 2012, we did another course that was working with the state legislature on creating a GPI law that we got passed into law in 2012, the first law in the country, although Maryland had in that same year or that same time frame had done some executive actions from the executive branch to do GPI. Our students, many of our graduate students have been involved in GPI studies across the country: Massachusetts, Maryland, Ohio, Utah, Oregon, probably missing a few, as well as national studies. All of that work has really culminated in a series of workshops that came out of this GPI in the States initiative that the Demos Institute was running in conjunction with Maryland. That workshop, I forget what year it was, myself and Mary Jane Fox led a group of grad students to do kind of a 50-state assessment to really kind of reveal sort of the pros and cons and inconsistencies in what was then called GPI 1.0, the first kind of methodology. John Talberth was part of that workshop as well, some of his colleagues, and they sort of took that work and ran with it and created the 2.0 methodology, which has now been applied in Maryland, Hawaii. We just finished another class, another group of students of unpaid labor that are updating the Vermont study to 2.0. So along the way, it's been a lot of state work, some national work, some international work. We did a GPI study in Iceland, again with students, and so a bunch of international comparisons as well. One of our grad students went off and did a kind of full comparison across all the national studies, 20 plus studies in the world. So it's been quite active in this space on research, but I'll just say briefly also in the policy realm, testifying in the state legislature, working on national legislation to sort of ask the Bureau of Economic Analysis to do this kind of work. National legislation, as you might guess, has gone nowhere. But then also working with other states, most notably Massachusetts and Maryland. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. Go ahead, Eli.
Well, yeah, thanks. Mine will be more brief. But so I'm a PhD candidate in at UC Berkeley in Energy and Resources Group. I've been there for several years through a master's degree, and previous to that, I was actually working at a Global Footprint Network and working on the ecological footprint. And I started doing GPI research through a professor in economics at Berkeley, Claire Brown, and she had started just very sort of early stage work trying to do a GPI assessment of California. Can you hear that saw in the background? Should I shut that window? You can't hear it. Yeah. So she'd started with another grad student to try to do an assessment done. That early San Francisco one that was done, I think. And I just kind of started working with her and you know, filled that out, worked on that for a while. And it was mostly me and a couple of undergraduate students here and there, and we ended up doing California like this 5-year time series, which was what Claire Brown had started. And when we finished that toward publication, we were sort of thinking about, you know, what more than just saying like, here are our results. And at the same time, Jon and Mary Jane's 50 States was about completed, and I think not published in journals, but I think Mary Jane's PhD was finished by then. So we had the results, made some correspondence, and what we did was took their California slice of the 50 states, and in our paper in ecological indicators, we did a comparison between the results for the components and the methods for the components for California from that, to just sort of, you know, investigate a little bit different data you might use for a particular state and how that would make a difference, different methods, particularly sort of the difference in a big 50 state study, you're going to tend to use, as they did, national data scaled by, you know, regional factors, state factors, because it's obviously an incredible amount of work to go state by state looking for different data sources from each state's, you know, various agencies and nonprofits and so forth. So whereas we were just doing California, so we were able and naturally did that. Anyway, so maybe I wasn't shorter, but I did that. We published our paper, and from doing that with such a short time series, I was somehow inspired to continue that work, and built out a longer time series from California, from what we'd started 5 years, and then worked on an assessment like 1995 to ultimately 2017. And because some of the data was still coming from national data that we scaled, it was a natural extension to do a US version. And so I did that at the same time. So with these two studies, two calculations, GPI California and the US, 1995 to 2017, and have them in parallel. And that's kind of like the actual work that I've done, and we have a paper that's still in review with Ecological Economics, hopefully finally being done soon, which is you know, the results of that, but actually more centrally looking at some methodological innovations that we're suggesting. We can talk about this if we get to it, but staying primarily with the 1.0 framework and the 1.0 methods in general, but focusing on 5 particular components and their methods, and I talk about in as much detail as anyone would ever be interested.
Thanks, Eli. Go ahead, Rob, you up?
Thanks, Regina. Such an awesome panel to be taking part in. So I started doing GPI work in 2018 when I was starting my practice, Scioto Analysis. It was sort of our first project, was to do a GPI measurement for Ohio. And we've done a couple more GPI studies since then, in particular doing one where we were doing an R, statistical programming language. I'm also the president of Gross National Happiness USA, which is an organization that's been advocating for GPI measurement across the country. And I have a big interest in making sure that we have more GPI measurement at the state level and eventually at the federal level. So that's kind of what brings me here, and happy to have some conversation here.
Great, thanks, Rob. So just briefly, my experience with GPI started in, I think, in 2012. A colleague of mine who was heading up the Office of Environmental Quality Control here for the state of Hawaii approached me and asked me if I knew anything about GPI. I was like, well, of course, I teach it in my ecological economics class. And he said, well, how about doing it for Hawaii? But he has no funding. So again, we cobbled together a team of students, lots of students, and my colleague Kirsten Olson, who's at University of Hawaii at Manoa. We had a really great time launching our GPI team. We first looked at the environmental indicators the first year for the annual report for the Environmental Council for Hawaii. Then over the next 2 years, we incorporated all three of them. It ended up in a paper that we published in 2014. That was really kind of our first whole calculation of GPI. And since then, we've just kind of been working bits and pieces on it. We've been working with our community partners and spreading the word about GPI, and working with Aloha Plus Challenge, our dashboard for our state, working with the Hawaii Economic Association, so that everybody kind of knew about GPI. But it wasn't until a couple of years later, just more recently, that the state economist who we had worked with earlier approached us to update the GPI. And this was just in February 2021 that we started to update our 2014 work. And what was supposed to be only 2 months of summer salary turned into a year-long project. And so we just kind of finished that up for, it's the Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism for the state of Hawaii. So that was just finished in February 2022. So we're still kind of recovering from that. But we've used the GPI 2.0 model, basically Talbert's model, more from Talbert and Weistar, from their 2.0 pilot accounts. We pretty much use that as is. So lots of different updates that we've included into our latest version of GPI for Hawaii. So still kind of, trudging forward. So, so I'll go ahead and stop there. So you can see that we've had, a lot of different experiences that we're bringing to the table here in terms of, research versus application, and geographical scale, and timing, and which methodology, and things like that. So I think we can just start out with our round robin. And since we have such a small group, maybe if we get some questions in the chat, we can incorporate those as we go along as well. But just, John, maybe I'll call out to you first, if we, to start the round robin, maybe if we just give you the basic question of, what do you see as some current issues or challenge or opportunities for GPI? If you put that out there, and then maybe we can each kind of react to it, and then we'll go round robin.
Sure. I mean, a challenge that comes to mind is the one that has already been referred to, that states have done GPI studies, states have used local data to do GPI studies, and that's been a challenge in that then it's less comparable to other states, right? There hasn't been a kind of uniform database that we can all tap into like the Bureau of Economic Analysis has. There hasn't been a sort of universal set of indicators. I think the general set of indicators has been somewhat uniform, but each state has kind of done their own version. And so that's always been a challenge. It was a challenge early on when we passed the GPI law in Vermont. The state said, don't go off and do your own thing, make it comparable to Maryland, because Maryland had done this initiative to the executive branch. And we were like, but Vermont, we could do this. No, make it comparable to Maryland. And that was part of the initiative to do the 50-state study, to kind of make one consistent database. But as Eli already referred to, then the limits of that, of course, right, is you're not taking advantage of best available data at the state level. 2.0 is helping with that to some extent. For example, the ecosystem services has expanded to a very big category of ecosystem services, not just forests, wetlands, and agricultural land use, but a whole suite of land use types. So early on with the kind of 1.0 method, I know Hawaii was like, hey, coral reefs, where are they? Utah was like, hey, deserts, where are they, right? So we've been kind of expanding the data sets so that it can be kind of more comparable, and then states can kind of pick or choose. So that's been one helpful element on the challenge. I'll just say briefly, the opportunity is the opportunity that there always has been, is to change the narrative, right? To move away from all economic activity is good to a sense of economic activity creates benefits and costs. That's been the main kind of policy legacy in Vermont. You can't point to GPI and say GPI did this, 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 and this for Vermont. But what it has helped to do is change the conversation away from quantity to quality, away from Daly and Cobb early on, called from growth to development, right? That's the kind of narrative that's shifted in Vermont, and it's helped kind of leverage the GPI law and the GPI studies we've done, has helped kind of talk about the quality of the economy and that all growth isn't created equal. We've yet to kind of get to the full, what size of the economy should we be? What's the right scale of the economy? How do we make a just transition to that right scale? That's the kind of next wave. The next opportunity is to really say GPI is still grounded in the kind of same sort of welfare economics, same thought process of GDP. You know, instead of growing GDP, you grow GPI. But at some point, and we'll talk about this maybe later, is that GPI still itself is a weak, if anything, it's a weak sustainability indicator. It's by no means a strong sustainability indicator. By dollarizing everything, great, you can compare it to GDP, but by dollarizing everything, you can seamlessly trade between social, environmental, and economic factors. So I'll stop there.
Okay, Eli, you're up. Reaction to that or anything?
Challenges and opportunities. That's where we're starting, right? So I think I want to echo John for a start in terms of the opportunity, and I think maybe even thinking about the success, like of all the sort of, you know, I think we all, or some of us at least, have this hope and interest that there'd be much like concrete success, some sort of policy change that would really change in the direction and the way that, you know, priorities were made on a government level. But I think that, you know, key to the whole intention, I think, is to change that narrative, and I think, you know, that's an ongoing opportunity, and I think, you know, to the extent that it can be, it's been a success too, and continues to be, I think, the greatest element of, you know, what GPI can do and is doing. A challenge I wanted to point to that is sort of a particular interest to me is what I feel like is a little tension, you know, alongside the data stuff, which John talked about, and obviously having experiences with that and sense of that as well. But this tension between like research and policy, and in parallel, I think even more importantly, consistency and innovation. So there's this sort of like customization element that John talked about, you know, by state or region compared to, you know, another region doesn't have the same things relevant. I think there's also a tension around whether do we all do things the same to make it comparable, and to keep the methods static and therefore sort of consistent. So in a sense, like, this is what the GPI is, this is what it represents. You know, we can be confident that it's saying something meaningful because we use it over and over again, and it says this, and then it says this, and it just represents a change over time, you know, in the actual society, or this sort of impetus for innovation, for improving, which I think comes from a couple of, you know, a couple of motivations. One being just you know, an interest by actual practitioners to do things better. You know, once you get into the weeds and you start to see, oh, you know, maybe I could actually represent this in a little bit better way, not just with data, but even methodologically, we're trying to represent this element of society that I think, you know, makes more sense to do it in this way. Some, you know, criticism and discussion in the literature and academia in general about whether, you know, this GPI version really represents what it's meant to or what it could do. GPI 2.0 is an example of reacting to the, you know, some of the legitimate criticisms or the legitimate sort of impetus to improve, as is, you know, the initiative that we're doing, which is different from the GPI 2.0, but also innovating. But the one thing, and I'll, you know, round it up as a single point, is to say, I think there's a tension too, in terms of academia, let's say with my experience in trying to publish the work that I've done, nobody wants, it's not appropriate to publish academically just the result of the GPI study. This is a study of this region, and we've done it in the way everybody's done it before. That's not an academic article. For that, you need something that contributes to the literature, contributes to academia, contributes in some innovative way to the research. And so there's this impetus, I think, and there's therefore this tension to think about like what contribution can you make to this progression, which is in tension with this sort of other side where a more stable, consistent set of methods and framework would probably lend some credibility to the indicator overall.
Okay, interesting thoughts there. Rob, how about you? Opportunities, challenges?
I think the cool thing about GPI 2.0 is I feel like it kind of ironed out a lot of the methodological problems with GPI 1.0, and where like some folks were saying, like, is this more of a sustainability measure, or is this more of like a hedonic welfare measure, or is this like a Pigouvian welfare measure? And everyone was, I mean, it was honestly trying to do a lot of different things, and I think even with those problems, it was still valuable and was the work I've done has mainly been GPI 1.0 work, and I still think it's a valuable way to improve on how people are thinking about the economy. But the 2.0, I think it really planted its flag in saying we're trying to measure welfare better than GPI. We're trying to measure economic welfare better than GPI 1.0 and better than GDP. And I think that's a big opportunity, is to get people to think about, kind of like what Jon was saying, what does it mean for the economy to truly grow, and what parts of the economy are being masked when we just look at our formal market economy and we leave out external costs, and we leave out the informal economy of unpaid labor done at home. That's GPI does a good job of actually. I actually don't even think it's like saying like, oh, economic. I don't think it's really exposing, like, you're drawing a line between like the economy and like society. It's really just saying like, this is a more honest view of what the economy looks like than what GDP gives us, and that's super valuable. As far as the challenges go, there's still stuff that goes beyond that. I mean, we do some tweak. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be, GPI measurement is never going to stay, stagnant. But there are things that matter that are outside of the economy too. And that's, I think, when you look at things like the Human Development Index, when you look at poverty and inequality measures that we use, even things, Gross National Happiness USA, like we're doing a survey right now focused on subjective well-being, where we're asking people about experience, subjective experience of happiness, fulfillment, anxiety, and meaning. And those are things that you're not going to get from a measure like GPI. And I think that's, if we talk about challenges, like, I mean, I'm a pluralist when it comes to this sort of thing. I don't think you're going to find any one measure that's going to tell you, okay, with this, we can plug a policy into this this formula and then get out on the other side if it's a good or bad policy. Like, we're ultimately going to have to use a number of different measures. And the challenge we get with policymakers is, how do we communicate these to policymakers without overwhelming them with different statistics and different measurements?
Great. Yeah, great comment. I'll just say one challenge and one opportunity really quickly. And then I picked out some points that I want to try to go back to, if you guys don't mind. So definitely the challenges in terms of standardization versus localization, right? Lacking the consistent database, Jon, as you said. I mean, we've all been faced with those types of things, especially out here in Hawaii. We have policymakers here that talk out of both sides of their mouth, because there's, well, not that, I mean, don't most politicians do that usually, but anyway, but the point is that, they're making this stand. Well, why would we want anything standardized? Because we live in Hawaii, and Hawaii is so unique and so different and so special that there is absolutely no way that you can, capture what the unique cultural ecosystems, whatever, that we have here, right? So why are we using a standardized methodology? but you have to make it standardized with all the states, right? So that there's this, we have to satisfy both things where it's saying, yeah, they want to be able to show and to reflect what's important in Hawaii. But at the trade-off is that if we go to standardize, then we lose many of those things. But they always want to be able to say, well, this is how we compare to Vermont, and this is how we compare to whatever. So we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place there. But I think, as Jon pointed out too, that 2.0 is definitely helping that by expanding the suite of land use types that are in there, definitely about the coral reefs. There's, for example, in Hawaii, we don't collect the in-stream quality data the same way that everybody else does it via EPA on the mainland. So we've had to come up with, different way that we evaluate stream quality. So we have, it still leaves us the flexibility that we can dig down deeper and look at our local things that are locally important to us and still remain standardized. Now, whether that means, we even talk about having auxiliary indicators, auxiliary data, and supplemental data and indicators, so that we have what's standardized under 2.0, but then we also have other indicators that explain better the local context, and maybe they're not monetized, but we have a kind of, let's just have appendices almost, right? So that's one challenge and one opportunity. I would say another opportunity is just how you can use GPI. Again, you guys were talking about the narrative, right? Very important here in Hawaii as well. And I always say that sometimes the process is more important than the product. Just the fact that you're using GPI to go through the process, to meet with stakeholders, to meet with community members, politicians, whomever that it is, regular citizens. It's almost at the end, the dollar value isn't really like, is it irrelevant? No, it's relevant, but it's the process that we've gone through that really has made the difference in the world. So those are just my two inputs on challenges and opportunities. But if we could go back to something, and Rob, I think that you said this, that there's not one single measure. You don't believe that there's one single measure. And for what all of our policymakers would love to have this silver bullet of a dollar value that they can throw out there and use to make, indefinitely to make decisions more easily. I think that's maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So maybe we can go back round to Robin again. So Jon, is there your experience is like what Rob is saying, that, there's not just one single measure. What's the role of GPI with other different measures that are out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, I agree. The attractiveness of getting GPI passed into law was policymakers looking for that one single measure, right? But we took a kind of 5 or 6 page bill and they whittled it down to 2 pages that got passed. But we were able to sneak into that bill 3 words, and other indicators. So it kind of opened the door for us to do other studies and compare GPI to other things, which we've done, again, with students. We've compared GPI in the state to the Sustainable Development Index. Some of that work that's been led from, I think, Columbia University. We've compared it to the ecological footprint. We've compared it to the Gallup Wellbeing, so more subjective measures. We've compared it to the UN Human Development Index, which has been done for all 50 states. And some of this comparability we published with Mary Jane in the second of the 2 50-state articles. And recently we've been working with some NGOs to move more towards something like Kate Raworth's donut economics framework. So we can get closer to what you might think of as a strong sustainability indicator, right? Where there's kind of a floor and a ceiling, and the sweet spot of the economy is to try to move away from efficiency and towards sufficiency to make sure that everyone sort of gets their piece of the economic pie and meets human basic needs, but does so by staying within ecological limits. So we've kind of we took a study that was done at the University of Leeds that took the donut economics framework and did it for, I think, 130 countries. And we took that and applied it to Vermont recently, and are now working with one of these quasi-government organizations here called the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, on using the donut kind of as a nice kind of intellectual frame in a way to move beyond GPI. to sort of see GPI as a kind of transition plan in Vermont, where we're still attached to GDP at one sense and still using dollarization, maybe broadening the sense of what are benefits and what are costs, but moving more towards a kind of dashboard approach, but with some content to it, with this donut approach. And if folks haven't seen Kate's book, it's really worth looking at. It's really a kind of a consolidation of a lot of thinking that's happened in ecological economics through the years. And our intent is to continue to do GPI because it's the law, but to sort of expand to these other indicator sets. And we've been pitching the idea to the state government about leading a state of the state report. And I think to us, that's the way of kind of threading the needle between standardization and localization, right? So we have a set of standard accounts that are done year after year after year and are comparable to other states that keep being updated through a GPI community of practice. But each year through a state of the state report, we're able to kind of tell our own story, carve out a particular piece of the puzzle, talk about, maybe if we had done one this year, would be kind of the post-pandemic recovery, one of the, I think, the theme of this conference. Next year, it could highlight the state of our lake. The next year, it could highlight, the whatever, the Green New Deal economy. So that's what we're moving towards, to kind of keep GPI as kind of one central metric, but to be able to kind of tell all the stories in a kind of more multi-dimensional, pluralistic way, to borrow Rob's phrase, going forward.
So Eli, how about you?
Yeah, no, I'm totally keen to jump in. My washing machine, which is very close to where I'm sitting, is doing its spin cycle right now, so I don't know if that is audible. But I wanted to actually jump on the other side of this question, because I actually think GPI as a single indicator to me is actually kind of important to my mind, at least, because I think the competition is GDP, which is this sort of one number, to sort of use politically. Is it up? Is it down? Are we in a recession or are we not in a recession? And I think, my sense of politics in the world in general, maybe this country particularly, but in general, is that, you kind of need simple stories a certain amount of the time. And it's not necessarily the policymakers. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but my sense is it's like politicians need a story to give and take to the people. What are they doing well, or aren't they doing well? And I think in that sense, to me, GPI does, and I guess moving away from a dashboard, moving away from kind of multiple different things, has a I think there's a lot of relevance for that, a lot of appropriateness for that. It's difficult, but I think that the GPI, that's the one thing that it does offer. And I think my tendency is to sort of like build on that, and just to throw in there. So definitely, obviously, have a sense of the challenges, especially the like weak sustainability, substitutability elements of the GPI. But my not impetus, but I see potential, let's say, in the GPI improving in such a way that is not integral to the actual structure of the GPI. I think that there's the fundamental framework, which is to say, we put a value on each whatever unit, an hour of work, an area of some natural resource, some externality. We use, in general, and I think this is just methodology of data, we use in general single values, which are representing marginal values at that particular time whenever that study was done, and we apply it across time. We apply it regardless of the, let's say, prevalence or the availability of that resource in that region. So I think there's potential, and I don't know if people are interested in this as a discussion topic, but to reflect some of these boundaries, some of these sort of ecological boundaries, for instance, but also like, the sort of different value of elements in the economy in relationship to their, let's say their, rarity, their proximity to some boundary, and so forth. And I think that there actually could be potential in using the valuation to represent the, different importance in different circumstances, and still incorporate it within this one framework. Right. So I think the substitutability, the weak sustainability is actually data and methodology. What do you call that? Like it's just coming from the methods and the data. And I don't think it's actually necessarily a limit of GPI. I think there's potential to actually change and incorporate that. That's one idea.
That's great. I want to I wrote some notes down because you're saying a few things that I want to go back and touch in on. So, but Rob, I want to give you a chance to kind of still play out this whole, I know that you started this part about with, how it interacts with multiple other indicators. Anything else that you want to add to that based on your work in Ohio or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, Eli brings up a good point here where we're trying to improve the measure of economic activity. That's really what I think about the project of GPI, and GDP is one number to do that, and having one number to look at for that is super valuable. But one thing that adds to that is I saw Ron Haskins speak a few years ago about evidence-based policy making, and he was a like Bush administration and kind of welfare reform guy, and it can be, I mean, he's like worked for like Republicans a lot of time, but he's also like worked like sort of hand in hand with a lot of like people on the other side of the aisle too, on like pushing for evidence and bipartisanship around like evidence building. And one of the things he talked about was in his talk, he put up this big pie chart, and I was like looking through to try to find it. This big pie chart, and he's like, this is my totally off the cuff idea of what I think influences policy. And it was like 15% interest groups, 10% committees, 10% the administration. It's like all these different factors, like the public, the media, it was probably like 15 different things up there. And then research had like this like 1% slice. And I was like, yeah, I get that. And really, when we talk about indicators, I mean, they're living inside that 1% slice. Now, John's kind of made this case that I think is valuable about how like a good indicator can kind of bleed out of just the research space and make like certain people think about their motivations differently. So maybe a committee chair sees a GPI study and then they're like, oh yeah, like maybe we should be thinking about economics in a different way. And then that kind of bleeds into that. But just for the simplicity's sake of just thinking about it in the research space itself, if we're trying to, if we give them five, even just 5 different indicators within that little 1%, like that can be overwhelming and can sort of dilute out that conversation. Now, like my ideal world, like my like technocratic utopia world, is one where a policymaker is making a decision and they get a sheet of paper from a policy analyst that says, we crunch the numbers, and as far as our best estimate comes, this is what the economic growth impact is going to be as measured by something like GPI. This is what the poverty and inequality impacts are going to be. This is what the human development impacts will be measured by something like, Human Development Index or the SURF Index. And then here's what the subjective well-being impact would be. And then the policymaker would get that sheet and then, get to have that inform their policymaking decision. We're not close to being there at this point. Does that mean that we should have our eyes off of that? No. I do think I do talk to some people sometimes when they're talking about GPI, and they'll sometimes be like, this is a measure of like how good the country is. And it's like, that's not really what it does. It measures economic, it measures welfare in an economic sense, narrowly defined. It doesn't, and it has, the old one had an inequality adjustment, the new one has its own inequality adjustment. It's like we're all, does that really tell us what we think about inequality? Does that answer the questions we have? I don't think it really does. Does it tell us anything about poverty? No. Does it tell us anything about like racial justice? Certainly not. And these are all things that need to be incorporated in good policy making. Whether this is the space for it, I'm not quite sure. I think there are a lot of question marks around that. And I don't think GPI is a silver bullet, but like, is it an improvement? If GPI was doing the same thing today that GDP does today, where we're getting quarterly reports from the Bureau of Economic Analysis on GPI, and we were measuring our recessions based off of that, yeah, I think the world would be a better place. I do think that that's something that like I could, stake my flag on.
Yeah, that brings up a whole great points there. So it's yeah, I mean, GDP, you could say it's an arbitrary measurement anyway, right? So really, what's the difference? But yeah, so I want to just react a little bit, and then I want to maybe get to a couple of things that are in the chat here too. But before we do that, so a couple ideas that I've heard you guys talk about, trade-offs, right? Like, so GPI is helping us, or helping policymakers to see trade-off between one thing and another, right? Between the different categories. And you're giving them a dollar value, so you can they can inherently they're making those decisions anyway, based on their funding and choosing one thing versus the other inherently. And does GPI help to better inform those decisions, right? So, but Eli, there's something that you said about, it's about the substitutability and things like that, but you talked a little bit about boundaries, right? So do the values that come out of GPI, and I think one of the best parts about GPI is that, yeah, it's an index, and it's one number that gets spit out at the end, but because you can break it down into the sub indicators, and that you can really disaggregate things to get deeper and deeper into things and tell stories, I think that's a really valuable thing. But what you mentioned was something about having these different measures, or having those different indicators. It's showing what we value within our own community, or what we value within our own economy. But you also mentioned the word boundaries, and so that's like a hot ticket item about GPI. And does it actually include boundaries? I mean, are we the measures that come out, or the values that come out of GPI, are they really indicative of where those boundaries lie? I mean, yes, we can look at it, substitutability, trade-offs between things or whatever, but can you use that to compare to other measures do, to compare against boundaries to see how close we're actually getting? Any reactions to that one, Eli, and then I'll pass it off to the rest of the group.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my thought is, by sort of changing the marginal values, in particular thinking about boundaries, if we're thinking about a negative component that's a negative, something that's detracting from welfare or from sustainability, then we would say, we would assume and we would calculate the marginal value of that negative contribution as more, worse and worse. It's hard to say, like greater negative value as we got closer to the boundary, right? And maybe exponentially, depending on how, what science says about the impacts of those boundaries. And I think that idea kind of comes from us, and I've done some work with my advisor actually at Berkeley, who works on the social cost of carbon integrated assessment models. And in that calculation, we were thinking about that changes over time, right? And think about climate change. The impact of emissions isn't the same in each year, because there's a cumulative effect of those emissions, and so therefore, depending on what happens over time, and climate change is a great boundary, not a great boundary, it's an important boundary, but it's a great example of a boundary, which is to say, the closer we get to catastrophic changes based on climate change, we would say the contribution of the emissions that contribute to that potentially and increasingly imminent catastrophic change, would it be worse and worse? And so not have this single, and in fact, that's how the social cost of carbon works, really, deep down, is it's not the same value over time. It changes, and in part I'm saying that we could do that within the GPI to say that as we got closer to boundaries, particular ecological boundaries or other kinds of boundaries, those values would change, the marginal values would change to reflect that. And in that way, to incorporate the boundaries into the GPI. How do I do? I started strong.
So you're basically saying that the boundaries, these biophysical or sustainability boundaries, are incorporated vis-a-vis the social cost of carbon into GPI. It's not that GPI is out there establishing how far we are from a certain boundary, or a tipping point or whatever that it is, but you can incorporate that into GPI, in this particular case, the social cost of carbon.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that we could incorporate it. Like
Mhm.
right now, we don't, because we just give the same marginal value regardless of their proximity to any particular boundary. But if we have data, we have science on a particular ecological or social boundary, in fact, we could change the marginal value for the emissions as an example as we get closer to that boundary, and therefore GPI could incorporate this sense of lethal.
That makes sense. So it's currently not, GPI doesn't currently have that flexibility or that ability to do that. But so John, I was wondering, do you have any reactions to that in terms of talking about
Sure.
these physical boundaries, sustainability?
Yeah. Two reactions. One. I mean, I agree with Eli that you can incorporate this into sort of a diminishing returns framework or increasing cost framework. In fact, the improvements in 2.0 on the income inequality adjustment do just that, right? More and more unequal you become a society, the greater and greater the marginal impact would be. But I also say, I mean, this is the sort of attractiveness of something like the donut economics framework. And I think the reason we've been getting some traction with that, it is a simple story. It's just like, get inside the donut. You can see the image below the ceiling and above the floor, right? It's a simple story. It's multidimensional, but it's a simple story. And part of the task with something like a donut framework that could also be applied to GPI is setting limits, right? What are the social limits? What are the floors? What are the ecological limits? Going through the exercise of setting those limits. And that's what we did in the classifying when we did kind of a Vermont donut. The boundary condition is really key in GPI. We use a lot of baseline conditions. And it's been really tricky to define, like, what is the right level of leisure versus labor? What is the right level of volunteer time? What is the right level of household work versus, in-market work, out-of-market work? And so I don't know that we've ever effectively answered those questions, right, of finding those kinds of sweet spots. But it has, I mean, to sort of say yes to GPI, it has sort of created those kinds of conversations. So when I give my annual or usually every other year report to the Senate and the House, I carve out a couple of those examples and we have that conversation. We pick a kind of hot topic example and have exactly that conversation. And it has sort of led to legislative agendas around energy, for example, around greenhouse gas emissions, around forest fragmentation law. Like the GPI conversation has influenced a lot of those spaces. But the big question, especially to move towards strong sustainability, is sort of setting those limits. And GPI opens that conversation, but I'm not sure is any kind of magical answer to those conversations. At some point, maybe when we come back around again, I'd love to address Susan's comment here in the chat too.
Sure, and I'd love to address the natural capital comment as well, because I think that fits within this section here. But Rob, I wanted to give you a chance just to respond if you wanted to about boundaries.
I don't know. I probably have a different perspective on boundaries than a lot of people here. I mean, I get worried about some of the, okay, I read Donut Economics. I didn't like it. I was not like a super big fan of the book. And I think a lot of it comes around the boundaries conversation where like, I get worried about these sort of like neo-Malthusian implications of, these ideas. And I mean, obviously you want to have, like, we do have tipping point problems, when it comes to like carbon emissions in the atmosphere. And that's something that like, we should probably be thinking about as a boundary, like that's not something that we want to bump up against because there could be some really bad implications. And, I think that's, this is the big critique that we have of the social cost of carbon is like, it doesn't really deal with tipping points. And so, yeah, like, I don't know. I guess I don't want to throw it out the idea of boundaries completely. And when I think about like poverty, I mean, I think that we do want to be putting boundaries on how much, poverty, inequality we want to have in society. So like, maybe I'm a little bit more skeptical than I need to be. I just get worried. I mean, I get worried about some of the like, like Paul Ehrlich kind of conversations that folks have, and kind of like, oh, like we're never gonna find a way to like support this many. And I don't know. I'm not sure. I really need John to like look at the study that you were talking about where it had the 130 countries and the donut economics and like get my head around like how this stuff can be applied practically. Because I think when I read the book, I was just like, man, like what is the like actual approach here? Because like we do want to make the world better for people, right? Like we do want to try to get the most out of the resources that we have. And like economics isn't supposed to be about untenable growth, right? It's supposed to be about getting the most out of the things we have. That's the like fundamental definition of economics, is economizing on the resources that are available to us. So like, why wouldn't we want to like continue to improve our use of our resources? You know, like that doesn't sound like something that like I want to put bounds on. Like, oh, let's just give up on making, you know, the world better given the resources that we have. Like I don't want to do that, you know. So I don't know, maybe I'm just like not in the right headspace to talk about boundaries, but that's my kind of like extremely skeptical thought about about this.
And you have a smile on your face still, so that's good. It's okay. Skeptical. But one thing that I wanted to add, I want to point to, so Eric Nordman, thank you for putting that into the chat there. So he put in the chat about the announcement about the National Nature Assessment and Natural Capital Account. How does that, is the GPI work influencing that or vice versa? So that really comes into my mind because in terms of natural capital accounting, so my colleague Kirsten Olson is really, that's one of her really big projects, one of her really big things that she works on is natural capital accounting. And so when we do the GPI work, you know, it really becomes apparent. It's like, so which comes first, the GPI or the natural capital accounting, or the, you know, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And they really kind of complement each other very well because as in my opinion, GPI does not necessarily point to those biophysical limits. It doesn't necessarily incorporate the biophysical limits that we need to be cognizant of from a natural science point of view. And you can talk about marginal damages and you can talk about marginal costs and things like that. But if you're not really incorporating those biophysical limits into the correct calculation of your marginal damages, then maybe you're just flying blind. So it's really important to have the natural capital accounting in order to establish where we are and to try to figure out, well, what are those boundaries? So there's criticism of GPI that it's not really a sustainability indicator because it doesn't incorporate the biophysical limits that we need to be aware of. So I think, you know, again, hand in hand, natural capital accounting and GPI, we see them going together like, you know, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And that's the kind of work that we do here in Hawaii, right? Like we can't ignore the whole natural capital accounting thing. So, so Eric, I don't know if that that's just from my opinion, but I think that was a really great question and about there's been efforts in the past trying to do, you know, green accounting at the level, you know, for GDP to incorporate satellite accounts that were for natural capital, either for forestry or minerals or things like that. And didn't really get much traction over the, you know, after first initial attempt. So, but so John, you brought up, now that we're going into the chat, also Susan, I see yours, and John, you brought that up that you really wanted to try to speak to what Susan's comment is in the chat. So can you go ahead and take a stab at that, and then maybe we can do a round robin about that too.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Susan, for your question. Because I've been right in the middle of doing the research, but also sort of in the State House giving testimony. And as you might imagine, I get arrows from all different sides. The GPI is not enough, or GPI is too much. The free market advocates, just to really hone in on that piece, in my experience in Vermont, are hypocrites. So, you know, they want to tell the free market story. And when you talk about full cost accounting, you know, they want to equate that with some kind of social engineering, right? And lack of freedom and lack of choice and that sort of thing. Yet, when that full cost accounting approach is applied to something like government accountability, they're all on board, right? Yes, we want to know the full costs of government expenditures. Do you want to know the full cost of private expenditures? No, free choice. So there's been a lot of hypocrisy there. And we've gone toe to toe with this group called Ethan Allen Institute in Vermont around things like carbon taxes, done public debates with folks from the Ethan Allen Institute around carbon taxes. And I always sort of take the strategy of sort of showing them that this is a market-based approach, right? Again, I don't think carbon taxes are a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but they change the kind of economic climate where other things are then possible. And, you know, they see it as social engineering. And, you know, when we were testifying on GPI years ago, you know, largely the House, I think, passed it almost unanimously. The Senate, there were a few dissenting voices. And I think they said something like, you know, this is hippie economics, right? So they saw this as sort of a set of values that are expressed through GPI, which I agree. I agree completely. In fact, when you look at the 50-state study, you see kind of a red state, blue state thing emerge from the set of values that GPI is expressed, the set of values that comes from, well, the original study by two white men with white privilege who sort of did the thought experiment of what an index of sustainable economic well-being would be. So I'll just answer this question by something that we've talked a lot about in the sort of community of practice is this work came from academics to the public space, never with any public process or public input, right? And that to me has been one of its biggest hangups. And so the community of practice hasn't really expanded beyond a limited set of NGOs and a limited set of academics. So some of the work that I've done with Mary Jane Fox on this is exactly that. Like one of her unpublished chapters in her dissertation was around what would a community of practice look like? What could we learn from SRI? What could we learn from other efforts that have sort of tried to capture multiple voices and multiple perspectives? That hasn't happened within GPI, in my opinion.
And just real quick, what is the barrier for people to understand that private actions have public impacts? Like, that's so kindergarten. Like, help me understand.
What I mean is there's hypocrisy when they want to apply full cost accounting to government expenditures, but not to private expenditures. To me, that just reeks of hypocrisy.
Yeah. Okay.
I see. Robbie, go ahead. Robbie, you have your hand up. Where are you going to take this?
Is it all right to just comment on it in response?
Totally.
Because it was relating to what Jon said and what Rob said earlier and what Susan just said. One of the greatest critiques I've heard of the GDP is, at a minimum, calculate an NDP, a net domestic product. And again, to make the public-private comparison, the SEC doesn't give a crap about your revenues. Revenues are not what stockholders make decisions on with regard to their private investments. It's net profits. You have to deduct cost of goods sold. And so I feel like that language is so glaringly obvious as a flaw of the GDP. It's my critique of gross national happiness. It doesn't take into account the range of human emotions that you feel in addition to happiness that are normal and natural, like grief. And so I don't know what you do with gross anything. But I feel like in communicating with policymakers, using the language of net domestic product and reducing the costs of achieving that level of economic growth, that's cost of goods sold. It's a pretty simple framework. I just wanted to offer that as a reaction.
So how do you think we go about that?
Well, it's not strictly what the GDP does, is it? I mean, because the GDP increases the gross part by counting the things that are not counted. And in that sense, I think we would all agree is a good thing. So I'm not exactly, what I'm saying isn't exactly pro GPI, but some kind of, again, using the language of at a minimum, we should be measuring something like net domestic product.
Gina, I'll just add that, I mean, GPI does try to get at a net by at least counting benefits and costs separately. And I'll say that, there's been, I don't know, a dozen news stories about the Vermont GPI work through the years, and they all gravitate towards that point. So that's something that a journalist gets, right? That economic activity has costs and benefits, and it should be the net of those that we should be tracking.
Yeah.
So it's a really important point.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who took Econ 101 understands that there are these externalities that are not accounted for. And so if whatever we did to make the GDP go up worsened air pollution, someone has to bear that cost. That's such, again, just using that's kind of simple concept of netting out the costs of economic growth to get to something that is net. And that is, I agree with John, that is something GPI does very well. I don't know if as a public policymaker, if embracing the idea of the value of leisure and the value of volunteer work as something valuable to be counted. I don't know how policymakers think, but everybody gets that this is economic growth. It is gross, and it does not consider the costs that went into producing that growth, which is, again, in the private sector, it would be considered meaningless if you only measured revenue.
I just say, just on your example of the time use, we've been quite successful with that argument as well, right?
Good.
That your use of time in the marketplace has an opportunity cost. So we use a basic economic concept, right? It's less time with families, less time in communities, less time in leisure. And policymakers get that right away. So I think the philosophy behind it is appealing. Sorry to talk so much.
Regina, you mind if I say something?
Yeah, go.
This is associated with what Susan was saying and ties into this. The politics of this is like really like any politics, like difficult. Chris asked which states have GPI like right now and like who's calculating it. And for a long time it was Vermont, Maryland, Washington, and Hawaii. And John, am I right in saying Oregon just passed a bill? So I think they got Oregon either passed or is very close to passing one. So you're seeing the profile of states that are passing these these bills, and the national GPI bill that's been put forth was introduced by Ilhan Omar, who is has a reputation for like being in a certain like very left, like one of the most left members of the House of Representatives. And to me, that's a little bit, it's good because people are talking about it and it's getting out there. I mean, I told John, I've had a genuine progress indicator Google alert that I've been getting for like 4 years now, and it has not blown up at like nearly as much. Like it would be like a trickle, like an article a month basically. And then once Ilhan Omar's bill dropped, it was like, every day there was new news coverage for a few months. I mean, it was the biggest news thing around GPI for a long time. But I mean, just with the way politics are, like you get painted into one camp. And I don't think, to Susan's point, I think, and honestly to Robert's point too, like this is something that like shouldn't be a political question necessarily. Like I think folks across the political spectrum should have good reasons to want to improve how we do economic measurement. But as we get into the just living in this polarized political environment that we're in, where everything, you drop something down and it's going to fall down either the left side or the right side. It does create some some struggles, and you don't want to have like a whole bunch of people put stuff forth and then have it go away. And I mean, the nice thing is we did see in Maryland that it was a Democratic governor who were really pushed for it, and it wasn't completely erased by the Republican governor who took his place. So like maybe there is, maybe it can be something like, I see an analog to the use of cost benefit analysis in regulatory analysis. That was something that was put forth originally by the Reagan administration with very partisan political views, but then it was reaffirmed by the Bush administration afterwards, and then the Clinton administration, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, like they've continued to use cost benefit analysis. And, there's been tweaking and people, argue about, how things should be measured, but like the idea of using cost benefit analysis has persisted, even though it started as sort of, in sort of a partisan camp. So, maybe there's an opportunity for a better measurement like GPI to do something similar. Sorry to talk so much.
No, I agree. Eli, anything that you want to respond to?
No, just was jumping off the political question. I was thinking about if there's potential, like there's so many acronyms, but they're like guaranteed minimum income or whatever, 15 acronyms for the same basic idea that had like cross-partisan appeal to some extent, or at least like broad spectrum political appeal, which was super interesting for me in that political context, where it was able to sort of grab onto the combination of, wanting to help people and the freedom to choose that sort of cross those two, or the spectrum. So I guess I'm thinking about maybe there's a link back to this fundamental economics. The externalities are really basic to, economics 101, and GPI actually really does, I think, speak to that more than anything else. And I don't know, just thinking out about the potential for the general economic framework, which is so popular on the right, fundamentals of neoclassical economics. Externalities are not controversial; they're basic economics, and there's potential there to bring the conversation, make it a little, or somehow sort of appeal a little bit to the more right-wing elements.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. Just one thought that comes to my mind from being out here in Hawaii is that when it talks about the use of GPI and policymakers and stuff, it's here in Hawaii, and we say that, well, even the Republicans in Hawaii are Democrats, because it's just basically all Democrats, but in our state house and our state senate. But it seemed like our mandate, our tasks that came and were funded by the State Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism, is that it was, they were feeling the heat, right? There's heat on them to show accountability and transparency, and to actually show that they're addressing things that are, social welfare issues that they maybe haven't addressed very well in the past, even to the point of where now they need to be measuring other things, right? So I think GPI they kind of knew, our state economists knew about GPI, and maybe if it hadn't been GPI, maybe they would have picked something else. But I think really what it came down to was the fact that they have to show that they're doing something, that they have to be held accountable and transparent. And so at this point, we've built the whole GPI for them, and they're getting ready to put it up on their website, designing a GPI portal on their website and updating it every year. And for all the weaknesses of GPI, I have to say that that's one of the biggest successes I think that we've had in Hawaii, is that they're using that as a way to address the need for accountability. So I don't know, just something to throw out there. I don't know what it's like in other states, but I try to be the glass half full on that one. Any other comments that we have? We have about 6 minutes to go. So thank you also for everybody who put some questions in the chat. I want to open it, make sure that everybody that's out there if they have any other questions they'd like to ask us, or you need to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Chris, is there anything else that we can help you with? That you asked about the other states. Did you see the Wikipedia link that Eli had put in before? And so that's a good place to start. Where are you from, Chris?
I'm living in Washington right now, in Seattle.
Oh, okay. So I can't remember. So who's working on GPI in Washington State? Do we know? I know there have been previous, but definitely Oregon.
Yeah, I had spoken to the person who was doing the calculation. It was in their Department of Commerce. I forget what her name is, though. We had a conversation a few years ago, and she was a little bit worried that she might be the last person who's doing it, because I think they were worried about funding. Last time I had heard, but there is legislation on the books there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I know Sean McGuire, who was really the engine behind the Maryland GPI, consulted in Oregon and Washington, so he'd be a good contact person. I've kind of lost track of Sean, though.
Yeah, I'd heard from him recently. Yeah, he's still in Oregon, so he's not working on GPI stuff anymore, though. But
okay.
But he's probably definitely knowing him, that he's definitely really well, connected.
Yeah, I'll just to add to your point, Regina. one of the challenges we've had in Vermont, so we passed the GPI law with the Democratic Senate and House and a Democratic governor. But we couldn't get much. It really became a sort of tool for the more progressive side of the legislature to put pressure on a more centrist Democrat, the governor. And no governor wants to sort of stand behind an indicator that has bad news, right? Because this, the story of GPI in Vermont was framed, how I framed it, but how the press framed it too, was this sort of progress recession story, right? And so any indicator that sort of tries to tell the truth, I think, is in jeopardy of not being used or swept under the rug. So I don't think that's unique to GPI. But growing inequality, income inequality in Vermont. I mean, Vermont has changed drastically in the last 20 years since I've lived here in terms of our Gini coefficient, and that's not a story that a governor wants to brag about. For example, this sort of left-right thing. I mean, climate change is in GPI. It's a big cost in GPI. It's a deal killer. Just that one indicator has been a deal killer with any conversations with Republicans in Vermont or the political right in general. We worked early on some federal legislation with Senator Sanders, and he was trying to build a kind of left-right coalition around a GPI type bill, but because climate change was in there, went nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, that's good. How frustrating, huh? So Chris, do you have a question? And I see that Susan has her hand up too. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. Like, if there's so much pushback on that one part, has there been work on a GPI that like excludes climate change? I guess maybe no Democrat would want to get on board with that then, but just like maybe, something in between the net domestic product and GPI.
And it's a spreadsheet model. You can add or subtract things. There's generally 26 some odd indicators in most studies, so you certainly can present it with and without things. But that hasn't been done. It's been more of like show the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's not just the externalities that are associated with greenhouse gases and greenhouse gas emissions. That's one thing in GPI, but there's also an indicator. We also incorporate in the depletion of natural resources, so that we use for non-renewable resources, we incorporate costs that it would be to replace those. So that kind of, that's a hot button too that comes up. So it's not just purely taking out the externality costs, but great question though. Susan, can I move on to you then? I see you have your hand raised.
Real quick. So I was just sort of curious if climate change had ever been broken down into, excessive heat impacts on agricultural output, or something people could maybe stomach more. And then the second part is just a basic methodology. As resources become more scarce, does the cost, does the damage side grow? Okay, thanks.
Okay, who wants to answer that? I'm throwing it out to you guys.
I'll jump in to say, I think my understanding of your second question is it's more like, no, it doesn't grow, but it could. I think, and that's just like a data thing where we don't have so like a new the resolution of the research that says like what is the marginal value in this place at this time doesn't have like a time series change. It doesn't incorporate that sense of growing costs or growing rarity in that, but it could. It would obviously be hard work, but it could. So I think theoretically there's no reason why not. I'm actually really interested in that idea. But practically it would be challenging, and practically it's not done right now. And then on climate change stuff, I think it's certainly in the climate change literature to do that in general, but not the GPI. The GPI is sort of, kind of an overall picture. There's already a lot of data to kind of manage this in the state that it has with this 26 odd components, and you'd have to sort of go deeper into the research. But as was mentioned before, one of the values of the GPI is we have this overall number, and you can kind of drill down to the component. Within some components, you have some data.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a good session, and I'm sorry to close it during what must have been a very exciting conversation. We are now at the portion of the program in which we will have our member meeting. So I welcome you all to stay and participate. This is the first meeting we have had since 2019, given the pandemic. So there's probably a lot to discuss and update you on. I am going to, I'm going to share an agenda. Let me get that here. All right, you should be able to go to that document in the link and click on the agenda and also other materials that we'll be referring to in the course of the meeting. So the first thing I'd like to do is to have any of the USSCE leadership who are on the call, both those who are current leaders, who are coming in, who are transitioning out, introduce yourselves. So I'll start. I'm Laura Schmidt-Olabisi. I'm the current president. I am a faculty member in the Department of Community Sustainability at Michigan State University. I've been involved with the society for about 20 years, if you can believe that, from my grad days. And I'm an ecologist by training, but I work in a very interdisciplinary space around climate change, agriculture, and food systems mainly. So let's see who else is on the call. I'm going to just toss it to Robbie since he's kind of directly to my right. And then Robbie, maybe you can toss it to whoever else you see it here.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. I'm Robbie Richardson. I'm a professor in the Department of Community Sustainability at Michigan State University. I do a lot of work on food security and energy security globally. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to serve as past president for the past year and president before that. And so at this point, it seems appropriate that I should pass the torch to the president-elect, John Polemany.
Hi, I'm John Polemany. As Robbie said, I'm the president-elect. I'm a faculty member at the Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, a very strange area for an ecological economist. But a lot of my work, most of my work, I would say, focuses on sustainable agriculture and energy policy and energy poverty. And look forward to working with everybody and trying to bridge the gap that I think has occurred over the last 10 or 15 years with some breakout groups, and see if we can bring back everybody into the fold and really create a strong organization to create some policy change and some change that is much needed. Thank you. And I see John Sorrentino, our treasurer.
Hi, John Sorrentino. I was a charter member of USSCE, and currently I'm in my third term as secretary treasurer. My research has been on residential development at the watershed level and urban green amenities to offset income inequality. Thank you. Any other board members around? Susan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Santone. I'm in my second term on the board, and my focus has been the social media, the Twitter and LinkedIn. So it's been exciting to watch our following grow and interact more with people in the field around the world. I teach at the University of Michigan in the School of Education, and my involvement in the field has primarily been bringing ecological economics and sustainability into K-12 curriculum and teacher preparation. So,
Roland.
I can't hear something. I want to hear.
I have a junior board member with us too. I know what that's like.
But that is.
Here, Roland, do you want us to have you go later? All right, Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Eric Nordman. I'm a newly elected board member, so thank you very much. I'm a professor of natural resources management at Grand Valley State University, near Grand Rapids, Michigan. I teach courses in environmental economics, ecological economics, and natural resource policy. My research interests are in economic valuation of ecosystem services. I've been doing some work on green stormwater infrastructure and also institutional analysis and the commons. And I recently wrote a book about the work of Eleanor Ostrom. So I'm really excited to be a part of the conference. It's going great, and really excited to work with the board to make this society keep it going and make it even better. So thanks. I'll kick it back to Roland. He's ready.
Hi, sorry for the disturbance there. My name is Rolando Fori, and I am a member of the board. I joined the board last year, and it's been a great opportunity to learn more about the organization, to help with the conference programming and all that. Aside from the board, I am also a postdoc at the University of Illinois, and my work really involves issues around environmental sustainability, food waste, and invasive species. And I'm happy to be part of this great organization.
Thanks, Roland. And then Kyle, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kyle Gracie. I have been the executive director for a little over a year now for the society. My background is in economics and physical sciences. I'm an independent consultant primarily in economics, and similar to Laura, have been a member of the society and involved for about 2 decades now, originally in the undergraduate ecological economics program at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Thanks. Am I missing anybody? Just looking, some people are popping on and off, so I'm just making sure. Okay, well, that's who we are. We're a small enough group that we may get the, depending on our time, we may have the rest of you introduce yourselves as well, although I know many of you. But right now, let's move on to some orders of business that we can get through before a more interactive piece. So one is to approve the minutes from the 2019 meeting. So this was a long time ago, and you know, I'm guessing that many of you were not necessarily there, but we did want to, you know, do the formal thing and give them to you so you can see, you know, what we discussed at that time, which was at the last biennial conference, which was held jointly with the Ecological Society of America, as you may recall, in Louisville, Kentucky. Some of us were there. So I guess any comments or additional information about that? I know Robbie and John, you all, you know, took notes at that meeting. So anything you want to say about it before we approve the minutes?
Well, I guess the most important thing we did was change the standing committees. And then we discussed our relationship to ISSEE, but didn't resolve anything in the latter category.
Right.
So we did change the standing committees to the ones that you mentioned in your document. That's all I have.
Okay. So if there's nothing else, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Awesome. Okay, if you are a member, you can vote to approve the minutes. All right, looks like we have a quorum of those present. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to the treasurer's report. John, over to you for that.
Okay. So our bank account contains 8585. PayPal contains 1543, which adds to 10128. So we're fairly flush in the history of this organization, but we do have to pay some conference expenditures. The membership is now 160, and that's up 2 from our board meeting membership report. And that's all I have.
Thanks, John. And for those who haven't been with us recently, can you give a sense of, you know, membership in terms of like what that looks like over the last few years? It's been fairly steady, right?
It's been below 200 for a long time. And Robbie brings up the idea that maybe 10, 15 years ago, we approximated 300. Robbie, is that true?
Yeah, more than 300 and around 2008, 2009.
So in the meantime, we had the biophysical people storm off and be their own thing. And then we had the E4A kind of become their own thing.
Yeah, I think there's been some attrition as well, right? Just folks kind of slipping off and not renewing their memberships has been another piece of that.
Well, we often get student members who disappear after the low fee. But we also have this notion of honesty in terms of representing your dues with respect to your income. Which we haven't solved as a problem, quote.
Sure. I'd like to, you know, give everybody the chance to ask questions as we go along. And like I said, we'll have a more interactive discussion in a bit, but if you have questions about anything that's being talked about, feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat. Otherwise we can, so thanks, John. I have a couple of, you know, things to kind of point out from the materials that I shared with you in the Google Doc. So one is just, you know, you're welcome to kind of look through the summary of activities of the society that we've been doing since 2019. So as you can see from the Treasurer's report we just had, we are a relatively small society, both in terms of membership and in terms of resources. But I think, you know, given that size, we actually leverage it quite well. And we've been staying, you know, current and kind of giving out content, including during the pandemic. So we've had a webinar series and kept that up during the pandemic. We've had 8 webinar series since 2019, and the recordings of those are all available on the USSCE website if you want to go back and check those out, including a really great kind of what is ecological economics intro that Regina and Phil did, which is great for sending to anybody who asks the question, what is ecological economics? We've also, with Kyle's leadership, revamped the website to make it much more user-friendly and to really kind of organize all of the ecological economics content. And I will say we are ahead of the, you know, at the vanguard on that to some extent, because IC then decided after we did it to also revamp their website. So I think we were first. Susan has been leading our social media strategy and has been getting out a lot more content via LinkedIn and Twitter, and I think less so Facebook, right, Susan, but very active on those platforms. So I encourage all of you, if you're on those platforms, to and you are able to, you know, in a way that's conducive to your mental health, go in and interact with the postings from USSCE and retweet them and engage with them, because that helps. And on the IC side, we've been having all the regional societies kind of try to retweet and engage with each other as well to boost that reach. Susan, do you want to say anything more about that?
Sure. If you're on those platforms and we're not following you, please do a tweet and tag us, and then we'll be sure to follow you. Members can also post on the LinkedIn site themselves. So, for example, Eric posted about his book and a webinar. So it's also a great way to promote each other's work. And that was one of the benefits of the organization that came up when we did the surveys last year.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Susan. Oh, yes, and that's something I didn't mention in the notes, but I should have, that we did do a membership survey also during the pandemic, and a lot of these activities were based on what our members said that they wanted, you know, again, being within the realm of feasibility for us as a small volunteer society. And then, of course, we held the virtual conference this year, which you all are at right now. And last year we had a virtual poster session with a lot of students participating in that. So that was a lot of fun. So that's what we've been up to. I also want to point out, and I saw that this was asked in the chat as well, we do have 4 standing committees, and we are always looking for people to step up and serve on those committees. So you can go to the link in the Google Doc to read the descriptions, the mission statements of each of those committees, but they are membership, focused on increasing our membership, reaching out to members, as you would think. Curriculum, getting ecological economics materials that are usable for people who want to teach ecological economics or use those to, in any context to kind of explain the principles of ecological economics, website and communications, and external funding. In this year, when we were kind of preparing for the conference, we had those committees mostly working on conference stuff, but as of next month, they're going to transition back into working on these aspects. So if you are interested in joining any of those committees, and I encourage you also to reach out to any other ecological economists who may not be here today, who you think might be interested, please do contact me or contact Kyle at the information I put in the link. Okay, any questions on any of that information or any clarifications from my fellow board members?
Well, I'd like to mention that we had something like 70 people at our 2017 conference in St. Paul. We had 40 people roughly in the 2019 conference. So the organization doesn't seem to be that enthusiastic. We like the subject and we interact once in a while, but we don't seem to have a lot of enthusiasm. The numbers who vote in the elections are painfully small. And hopefully in the breakout session, we can ascertain some of the reasons.
Right. Although, to be fair, the people that are here are probably some of the more enthusiastic folks.
I agree. So maybe they have ideas about roping the other ones in.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would add to that, Laura, is the committees, while they are primarily staffed by the board, those committees are all open to other members as well. So if anyone here or that who's a member has interest in serving on any of those committees, just let us know, because we are always open to additional contributions from the membership.
Yeah, and I just want to make the point, kind of following on what John just said, and look, I know this is a tough time for everybody. Everybody's got a lot going on. I myself am a mom and a professor and all that. So we all have limited time. At the same time, if we want to see the society do more, we all are an all volunteer society, and we need to make it happen ourselves, right? So the time commitment for the committees is fairly small. I would say it's only a few hours a month, really. There's maybe one meeting a month, and then it's up to you, what you want to do. So, even with a couple extra members on a committee, that can be another webinar or be another outreach mechanism or something that can really extend our reach. So I would say that if you're, kind of sitting there and not happy with what's going on or wanting to see more, then definitely raise your hand, get in there and help us out, because we can use all the help we can get. So that's my recruitment speech. Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, I had a question following up on what John had said. Which is, do we have some sort of outreach list, which would include current members, past members, possibly people who might be interested in material, but are not necessarily regularly in contact? Could we do a sort of periodic, broader outreach? Much of the interesting stuff that I was just listening to, I think could reach a wider audience. And in these, COVID days, everything tends to be electronic. So if we could have a sort of regular outreach beyond our existing membership, then maybe we could, promote things a bit more. And I would offer the outreach list on at least a one-time basis of our institute, which has several thousand faculty and students, in mostly in environmental areas. If we could think about how to use that, it might be possible to draw people in. I know the membership thing is very difficult, and I think that's primarily because universities now almost always have access to the electronic journals. So people don't need to subscribe to the journal, don't need to get hard copy of the journal. Therefore, what's the incentive to be a member? So I think more aggressive outreach would essentially be necessary to broader lists, as opposed to always talking to the same small group.
Well,
it's an excellent small group with a lot of very valuable research and commentary and discussion at this conference, but it seems to me we need to think of ways to get out more broadly. For this specific conference, I didn't see much outreach as far as I was aware of beyond the membership.
Well, may I start for fellow board persons? May I just start? When Erin Lennox was executive director, she and I tried to aim at the lapsed members several times, and the return was very low. Kyle, I think, has gotten into that groove, and he may report that the return is fairly low. We tried to correspond with the biophysical folks, but they did not respond to us, and now they send us their announcements about webinars, etc. In terms of other people, we met with the Ecological Society of America in 2019, and we hoped that would generate some interest, but it didn't. So we've been trying on the outreach, Jonathan, but the returns have been relatively nil.
Yeah, which is not to say we shouldn't keep trying. So,
I mean,
if anybody has more groups, we are very happy to reach out to, hey, have you thought about this group? It sounds like you have one at your university, Jonathan. We did, try that for this conference. We reached out to listservs and groups that we thought might be interested who haven't been members in the past. I think that maybe bore some fruit, but maybe not as much as we would have liked, but we always open.
Yeah, I did see postings by Susan on LinkedIn. And I think that's one valuable outlet.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Well,
Susan,
I just want to add one more thing that Robbie.
Okay, go ahead, and then Susan. Yeah.
Robbie started putting announcements on AERE.
Yeah.
Listserv.
Yes.
I'm done.
Go ahead, Susan.
So in terms of the outreach, yeah, LinkedIn is really great because you can post on your own timeline. We can share that. You can post on the USSEE page and then, share that with your contacts. So it's an easy way to get information out to people, like-minded people who might not be members yet. So we really encourage you to, share your own good news and then help spread the word. And then the second thing about the membership and, what is the incentive? We've been talking about putting some of the, I guess, more valuable resources sort of behind a member wall, where maybe some of the full syllabi or things like that would be behind a wall. And then there'd be, snippets and teasers. And then, it would be a member only. And I'll ask, Kyle to chime in terms of some of the technical issues and how to get that wall and with ISEE and all of that. So I'll let Kyle jump in on.
Sure. Yeah. So we're working with ISEE to allow that so that anyone with any ISE membership would still be able to access all of the content. Because, for example, in addition to our explicit membership, we have about 22 at last count folks who have indicated the U.S. Society as their secondary regional affiliation. And then, of course, there's the rest of the membership around the world. And then at the same time, we are, of course, trying to balance the publicly available content and our responsibility as a public charity to providing member content. But that's where that is right now. And we heard from you all, or some of you who took the survey last year about this, that you felt that was important that we balance publicly and privately available content. In terms of other communications channels, to answer, Regina, your question, We do track website statistics, so we do know who is coming, and at least in a regional geographic sense, and some other indicators who is accessing the website. So we do have that information available that we use. But I think to reinforce the original point, although we have tried a number of outreach and communications channels, and some have been somewhat successful and some have been less successful, we are always open to additional experimentation. The universe of potential contacts is very, very large that we have not reached yet. So if you have ideas for other places we can be reaching out to, we are very open to that.
Thanks, Kyle. John E., we have a lot of Johns here. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, this is Jon Erickson from the University of Vermont. I've been involved with USC for years, although not in the most recent years. I'll just say that maybe it's obvious, but from my experience, membership fluctuates with conference attendance. The major incentive is people renew their membership, just like I did 2 days ago, to attend the conference and get the discount. I mean, it's really that simple in my mind. So when you get a really good conference participation, you get a bump in membership. So the only time we've seen membership go up is when we've had, big conferences. So I'll just add that, and the fact that you all have maintained the membership that you have during the pandemic is you should be patting yourselves on the back. It's fantastic, because I consider myself as a fairly active member through the years, and yet I only renew my membership when I'm going to a conference. So that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And I appreciate that's a good way to put it. Certainly we're not where we would like to be in growth, but we haven't lost a ton of ground during the pandemic either, which is great. Yeah. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'd echo what John said. And again, compliments that you've maintained this membership. And that kind of bulge of membership in 2000, the kind of mid 2000s there. Another piece besides the conference was, I have an important call from a lawyer, but I'll get back to him here. Anyway, when we had a focus on a topic, like we did watershed restoration, and we said, here are the solutions. And then all of a sudden we got a bunch of watershed people who joined. And they were there for a while. So I think if there's something which says, this is going to help my job, as far as, then we're going to get people who join from those areas. And in the 2005 conference, we had a lot of people join who were just totally not connected with ecological economics before, because it was a big conference and they felt like this is useful. So I think whether it's valuation or some other topic, I think we could target a number of people, but it needs to feel like, okay, something's happening. There's an event. We're going to solve some problems, and then they're going to join. That was my experience for that period of running a meeting and being with the organization and such. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks for that. Yeah, Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. To sort of underscore both John's and David's points about events. We were struggling as a board, of course, early in 2020. And early in 2021, we held a virtual poster conference targeted at students, because we were brainstorming and thinking, okay, we have our careers. What can we do during the pandemic to bring together students as a community? And I don't remember the number of posters that were presented, but even that small event, because it's so inexpensive to become a member, that event boosted us from like 130 to 160 or something like that. So we got a boost in the middle of the pandemic. So even virtual events, I think, do help. And to the extent that we continue doing this kind of thing, people will remember to renew and that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks. Madhav.
Thanks everyone. Great discussion for a good cause. I'm from Florida International University, for those who do not know me. I was on the board, I think 2 terms ago, been one of the founding members of the USSEE on and off few years. I've been back for several years now. I'm also a member of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. So whether we want it or not, we are still in this virtual life. We've been kind of spoiled for the last 2 years, doing a lot of stuff online. Speaking of bringing more members, and I think there is those who already have been members of the society in the past, they know what our society is. But there are a lot of folks who do not know about our society. In the last, for example, this kind of goes back to what Robbie was saying. In the last 2 years, we all have been interacting with our students, and one of my students, Chloe, is here on the call. We have been very effectively interacting with our students. Like every 2 weeks, we have had student discussions, and which was regularly attended by all my graduate students. And then we also are looking for outside speakers to speak to my students. At times, I'm sure all the professors here on the call, you all have your graduate students. You meet with your students. Why not we all agree to a common date, 1 or 2 dates in a year or maybe in 6 months, and have our students attend this common forum, whereby some of us can speak to all the students. That would mean students from Hawaii to Puerto Rico, right? So they can get the same spot, same time, and listen to some of the senior members and scholars of the society. And who knows, we may pick up another 10 members from our student body. I would propose another idea here. What if we all, each of us, make a commitment to bring at least one other colleague of ours, either from our department, our university, or maybe from another university, invite to such a meeting, common meeting. So of course, we cannot sell membership the very first time they attend. If they attend, come a couple of times. If they like, then they will continue to associate with the society. So a couple of ideas that I have for kind of reaching out. Going back to John's point and Robbie's point.
I think those are great suggestions. Certainly a student forum is, we kind of did that with the poster session last year, but I think it would be great something to keep up. And yeah, definitely bringing more students in is fantastic for membership. And I like your point too about, any one of us can share and invite to the activities of the society. Susan's done such great work to put it out on social media in a way that is very easily shareable. So if everybody shares it to your network, say, hey, I'm going to this webinar, it's going to be really cool, here's the information. You're right, like maybe a fraction of the folks that show up at those webinars are going to say, hey, I'd like to learn more and maybe join. So just encourage all of us to be looking for opportunities to do that. Yeah, John.
Which one?
A couple things. One of the things I'm hopefully going to be able to, I have access to some work study students. So I'm hoping to try to get them to compile a database of various departments and contacts so that we can reach out to both faculty and students. So once that's created, to your point of reaching out to your colleagues, that would be great if somebody would, here's the database, somebody at this particular place. If people would be willing to contact them to get them involved, that would be extremely helpful. And the second thing is, along with the virtual poster sessions and conference for the students, maybe, and I'm curious if there's interest in this, maybe like the non-conference years, having maybe a workshop or two on a particular topic that would get people to talk about various things and try to come up with some solutions. But yeah, I'm curious if there's any interest in that.
Well, I'd like to add that during the Erin Lennox years, she would get people to register for the webinars, and often there'd be 100 or so, and 30 people would show. And then she would correspond with the people who did show to see if they'd like to join, and virtually no one did. So it's kind of a play on the Mahadev idea, but we've tried that something similar without the captive audience, but people seem to be interested in the topics and then would fade away after.
Yeah, Regina.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. So I was just thinking back on, the last couple of years. I haven't been on the board for a while now, but remember how, I was always on the curriculum committee and we would do the webinars and things like that. But what if there's some way that members could provide guest lectures to other professors who are out there who are not necessarily members of USSEE, but we could provide guest lectures to them, right? Like say, hey, this is something I'm doing. I'm happy to do a guest lecture for you. And then that way, not only are we reaching out to the professors who might not be members and would want to be members, but also the students that are in the class, and to kind of facilitate that idea that this is what the organization is. We love having students, undergrads and graduate students be members. We're very open to it. This is the kind of topics that we talk about, just as a way of doing outreach rather than depending on professors or students to come to our website to partake or to consume the curriculum information that we provide, but to kind of do more of an outreach. And again, we're all parents, we all have a tight schedule and don't have much time in our schedule to do that kind of things. But if we could just have like provide kind of scouting exercises, like let's go out there and see who we can find. And I'm only just saying that because the reason I found USSEE was because I picked up teaching an ecological economics class. This is however many years ago. And I was looking for resources. And if I had the ability to invite guest speakers to come to my class, especially now in the age of virtual, everything's virtual, it would be really easy. So just a thought. I don't know how to make that happen or implement it, but maybe a thought.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great idea. And again, it just requires, the human power to make that happen, so that could be something the curriculum committee takes up, for example. Yeah.
So Regina, you mean live performances, not webinars?
Yeah.
Not recorded
yeah.
webinars.
Like, hey, I just met Eric today. Eric was in my session today, and like, I would love to have Eric come and do not to put you on the spot there, but I would love for you to come and do a half an hour presentation on your book on Ellen Ostrom in my ecological economics class. I would love it. My students would love it. Now I am already a member, so that you wouldn't be recruiting me, but if there's a way that we could reach out to other people who teach ecological economics, that would be great.
Yeah, I think and Barry raised this in the chat. And this is something we asked our membership over the pandemic too, the question of, what are the incentives to get people to join, right? What are people looking for in the society?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Eric, you were delayed. I didn't mean to step on you. And it was definitely clear that, well, during the pandemic, people want more kind of virtual content and virtual community because people are not, traveling and looking for kind of in-person meetings, but clearly the community is kind of what people are interested in, right? And the content, much less so the journal and, the things that kind of were in the past. So that is something to consider is, what draws people to us, what attracts people to us. I think that a big part of it is that we're just a really unique kind of kooky society, and we probably never will be as big as the, AGUs and the ESAs of this world, and that's fine, but I do think that we can do more to help those other fellow kooky people kind of find us and connect. So, yeah. Well, we've segued a little bit into the discussion part, and we're a relatively small group, so we can keep going as a big group if we want to. So we've been talking a little bit about some of the questions that I had kind of suggested in terms of like, what are the benefits which you appreciate most, and why do you participate in USSEE? One thing we haven't talked about, which is kind of the inverse, but sometimes it's helpful to consider the inverse, what are the barriers that you see to you participating in the society as much as you would like to? Are there things that we could make better to encourage more participation, more engagement on the part of members?
This is Dave Batker, and mainly it's just time. It's just hard for me to get time. Not quite as easy it was in the past, but in the future I'll have more time.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And I think the pandemic really did a number on everybody's planning and scheduling as well, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and putting on my member hat, I'm thinking about before I was involved in the leadership. For me, it was just content that was relevant to my work. So it's easier to make time. I'm inundated by conferences and Zoom sessions, and having a clear understanding of where something might be useful to my day-to-day work is where it is particularly valuable. So I think just to reinforce that idea of content, and I think we heard this in the member survey last year, folks wanted more content that was relevant to their research or their applied work, and they wanted actually a sort of mix of theoretical and applications in terms of the kind of content that the society was delivering. So just continuing to think about understanding what our members and the wider world are working on, and providing content that is useful for those applications and research, I think, is where, at least for me and potentially for others, we will have the most success.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I'm thinking that it might be, Kyle, do you remember when we did that last member survey? Was it last year?
Yes, it was just about a year ago, almost.
Okay. Well, it might be worth doing another one in part to get a sense of what you're talking about. Like, what are the topics that people would be interested in seeing more content on? Because we are a pretty diverse society, so we could certainly pull together something on a wide range of topics. Yeah. Any other thoughts around, what do you get out of USSEE as a member? What would you like to see more of? What do you think would attract people to the society from people who are in your circle that you talk to, that you know of?
I'll just offer that I joined as a graduate student and have been steadily involved throughout since that time. And there were many in my peers at that time who remained involved in the organization beyond their grad student days. And that's why I really wish we could do a major push. It would be kind of an all volunteer push, just to all of you in the graduate students in your various programs that may touch some of the arenas of ecological economics. But they can become members for $15, and it's just really inexpensive. And then they could come to this Friday's panel session that's entirely involving PhD students. And maybe a percentage of those students would stay with us through the next few conferences and run for the board and et cetera.
If I may comment, one of the reasons that I stayed with the society, since 1999, is because of its multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary nature. During this time, for example, in the last 22 years, I have worked on fisheries, I have worked on forestry, I have worked on water, and I have worked on ecosystem services, agroecology, these multiple topics. So I'm an applied economist in that sense, right? But not on any particular resource, multiple resources, depending on, opportunities, grant opportunities, students' interest, and also the collaborators, interest, within my university and within in the local area, South Florida. So I found ecological economics is the only society that can embrace my multiple interests. But if I had concentrated, I could go to agricultural economic society, I could go to fisheries society, or I could go to ecology society or risk related society. But that's just one particular topic, and I may not be working on that topic after 2 years later. So ecological economic society has that advantage of pulling people who are interested broadly in the socio-ecological systems. I think if I were to identify a colleague or two in my department, I would look for those type of people. And this is kind of my suggestion, in terms of any session. This is how we may want to reach out to other people. And they may not be readily, they may agree to join the society, but at least over time, a few attempts, inviting them for webinars, exposing them to different various scholars in the society, they may be convinced to join. And definitely, in the long term, obviously, we had to reach out to students, students who are interested in multiple issues, like my student Chloe. She's right now she's working on ecosystem services, but she's interested in environmental policy and stakeholder engagement, things like that. And she's going to be like me and most of us here, very multidisciplinary type person. And those are our future. And we need to do a better job in reaching out and securing their participation.
Really excellent points, Madhav. I see a lot of people agreeing with you in the chat, including me. So yeah, we are a bit of a kooky society, so we need to find those who appreciate that. Colin, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I can't be on video, but yeah, my name is Colin Murphy. I'm a new member of the ISEE and USSEE, I guess, and I joined because, well, I'm a master's student as well. So I'm a master's student in public policy. And I guess I joined because I'm really aligned with the degrowth movement, and I'm fascinated by ecological economics and political ecology. I guess I wanted to share just sort of my new member's perspective for you and non-academic perspective around the question of how do you bring more people into the fold and keep them in the society? I guess for those of us who joined, who are practitioners and not academics, I think folks need a compelling reason to join a society like USSEE. What would be the reasons, I suppose, for someone who is not an academic to join and stick around, if that makes sense? If I want to be a policy professional trying to enact ecological economics in, say, Congress or think tanks here in DC, I don't know, what is the use case for me joining and sticking around? And so I guess as a new member, as someone who's not an academic, so I guess I would pose that to you all, maybe to sort of develop the discussion further. But I would just say that I joined because I am a practitioner, I'm a political organizer, and a policy person. Great to be here.
Great, thank you, Colin, and welcome. We're glad to have you. And I think that is a very important question, and it's one that I know the board has kicked around over the last couple of years, is how can we make content that is targeted towards people who are doing real things on the ground and trying to enact real change, and not just for an academic audience. But thanks for that reminder, it's important. Dave.
I'd like to echo to Madhav's point. I've just worked in so many different areas, so many different things and everything. And personally, I feel that ecological economics actually has the solutions for the 21st century. So we should be churning forward. We need exponential growth in our membership and our impact, no doubt about it. And I think though too, we have to come to realization that we need a budget. So we have to fundraise. I think it needs to be significant. I can remember back in 2005, I think we raised over $200,000, but it allowed for staffing. It allowed for, looking at things and a number of people. And maybe what we need are some collaborative events that actually do just solve problems, look at work that you get paid for, and the society can bring in some money. Because I think paid staff to me are crucial. It's really great. Everybody puts in time and volunteers, but it's not the same as paid staff. So I think there should be maybe a plan to build staffing, and that can be around picking 2 topics, 3 topics and saying, we're going to have a real impact here. So watershed management, aquifer management, whatever we decide on. And then going out to foundations. Foundations have funded ecological economics in the past quite significantly. And so maybe that's something that needs to be taken a look at.
Yeah, I would agree, Dave. And just so folks are aware, I am your paid staff member, but very, very part-time. And so that certainly constrains the amount that I can do to support the society. So I do
thank you.
Absolutely. Whether that's applied to additional personnel or to other expenses, I certainly agree that a more robust fundraising plan makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and Kyle is amazing for the hours he puts in. We get way more out of him than you would think. And but yes, I agree that of course with more resources you can do more. So go ahead and volunteer to join the external fundraising committee, and you too can help develop that plan. But there's another thing that you said in what you said, Dave, that I think is an interesting idea, which is, should we potentially pick a focal area for a given year? It's a strength of ours that we're so broad and interdisciplinary, as Mahadev pointed out. That's the reason why a lot of us are here. But maybe to pick a focus, and sequentially have a different focus every year could help us to generate more content or interest around a particular issue. So something to think about. All right, well, these are all great ideas. Anybody else who would like to add, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet? From your perspective, what could we be doing more of? What would you like to see from the society in the coming year? Yeah, Jonathan.
One thing that might be useful is to have a short summary of why it would be good to join USSE. Is what the benefits are. Because if we did outreach, perhaps on some webinar or related topic, or about publications or about curriculum, I know I could reach an audience of people interested in some of those topics, and it might be good if there was some brief why you should join USE. I'm dubious about the idea of a member wall. I think it's good in theory, but I hate to restrict stuff. As if we have good curriculum stuff available, it seems to me it's a little unfriendly to say you can't access any of this unless you're a member. I don't know if it might be possible to have a reduced introductory membership or something like that. But in any case, I think it would be good to have a brief summary of activities and publications, curriculum materials, that you can access as a member of USC, whether there's a member wall or not.
Yeah, good point. And certainly, that is something we discuss as a board, is the benefits and drawbacks of having a member paywall. And just to remind everyone that the student membership is very affordable at $15. So that is kind of the bottom tier at which you can get in. So yeah, you can even pay that for your students if they're extremely cash strapped. Other thoughts? We're coming to the top of the hour here. I know there's been a lot going on in the chat. I haven't been able to read all of it, but we are recording this, so it will be saved, and we'll write up the notes from this meeting, obviously. Any final thoughts? Okay, well then I just want to thank all of you for showing up today and contributing. And we have a great new group of board members coming in. I'm excited to see what we'll accomplish this coming year. And if you have a stroke of insight after this meeting that you didn't get to share, I'm putting my email in the chat. You can also reach out to ussceboard@gmail.com. I hope I typed that right. I was typing it quickly. And you can reach us that way. I also, again, really encourage you to go on LinkedIn or Twitter if you're on those platforms and share the material that the society is putting out. Susan's doing a great job with that. And that is also a way to kind of engage with, you can even like tag people in it if you want to invite people to certain things. That does help expand outreach. And thank you for coming to the conference. And I hope you enjoy the rest of it. I'm excited for tomorrow and Friday. We have some really great content coming up. So thank you.
We also need an undergraduate student for the board.
Yes. Oh, thank you, John. Yes, we did not have any undergraduate students run to fill that role this year. So if you know of someone who might be great for that position, please let us know. Yeah. All right.
I'll
Thank
leave it
you
there,
and enjoy
Chief.
your evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Thank you.